It's April, it's getting warmer, the grass is turning green, and it won't be long before we start seeing another sign of spring, butterflies. This scroll saw project pictures three of these beautiful light creatures, making an uplifting display for any home or office. This project has many interior cuts, and cutting them will require some experience on the scroll saw and a lot of patience. I made this one from maple, but you could choose any hardwood that would look good with this pattern. There are buku inside cuts in this pattern, and many of them are perfect circles. So rather than just drilling pilot holes for them, I'm going to measure them and use drill bits to cut those circles. This one, for instance, is 3/16. Drilling any of these that are the right sizes will save some time, plus the circles will be perfectly round. I always use a backer board when making holes at the drill press, as it minimizes tear out on the back side of the board. Sometimes that doesn't matter much, but on this it will because the back will be visible. In fact, you could consider either side of this to display the front once it's been cut. I drilled several holes up to 1/4 inch in diameter, then switched to a tiny bit to drill the pilot holes for the rest of the interior shapes. I have a metal case with a large selection of bits, and I chose one that would be large enough to fit the scroll saw blade and still fit in the smallest space of the pattern. The smallest of these inside cuts is not much larger than the diameter of the drill bit, so I had to be very careful to center the bit in the space. This design has three butterflies, with the smallest at the top, a larger one in the middle, and the largest on the bottom. Each one had some cutouts I could make with the drill press, and for the rest I made pilot holes to cut them on the scroll saw. The butterfly at the top has the smallest cutouts, so I'll start there and finish the most difficult parts first. The wood is 3/4 inch thick maple, and I'm using a number 7 Pegasus modified geometry blade. I base my blade size choices on the wood's thickness and hardness, plus the cut's complexity. I decided on the number 7 blade because so many of these cuts are complex shapes. Cutting will be slower than with a number 9, but it is necessary for this project. If you'd like to watch my video on blade size choice, I left a link on the screen and in the description. This first series of cuts are thin ovals with one end somewhat pointed. It would be very difficult to make that turn in any wood, but cutting a hardwood like maple makes it even more difficult. I'm going to approach these differently. I cut from the pilot hole to one side of the shape and followed the line to the narrow end. I made a partial turn, then pulled the blade back to the pilot hole. From there I cut to the line on the other side of the shape until I put a slight turn at the end, connecting with the first cut. The saw blade pushed out the waste piece at this point, and then I used the space to maneuver the blade into place to cut the other side of the oval. This one's end was more curved, so I could follow the blade along the line in the entire way. There are various cuts similar to this, so now it's a matter of repeating this procedure many times. The cuts are small in this first butterfly, but they get larger on the middle one and a little larger yet on the third butterfly. I started with the most difficult cuts, but you might want to start with the largest butterfly to practice your way from the somewhat difficult to the very difficult parts of the project. You can jump all over the place if that's what floats your boat, but I tend to be methodical. I can thank, or maybe blame, my German ancestry for that trait. The inside cuts for the first butterfly are complete, and I decided to make the cut at the top next. I usually save places like these for last, but making this one now won't weaken the piece, so it's perfectly safe to cut. Doing this will give a better vision of what the completed project will look like. I started at the right side on the outer edge and followed the line until I came to where I had to make an extremely sharp turn to form the shape of the butterfly's head. I cut right to the point where I needed to change the cutting direction, but I didn't try to make the turn because the angle was too steep. Instead, I backed the blade a tiny distance into the curve it had just created. Then, I pivoted the workpiece 180 degrees and backed the blade to where I had stopped cutting. Now it only took a slight shift of the workpiece to head the blade into the next direction I needed to cut. After following the line around to form the semicircle for the butterfly's head, I used this same technique to make the turn at the other side. Then, I made that relatively long cut up the side of the butterfly's left wing. As I neared the top, I needed to decide which direction to take. I kept following the line that created the wing shape because that was the most natural to follow, and it would give the smoothest shape to the wing. That cut ended at a point where I had to back the blade out of the cut. When I arrived back at the intersection where I turned before, I turned to continue the cut that removed the waste piece at the top of the display. This is what the project looks like after that step is complete. I cut the stand before moving on to the other two butterflies and more tiny cuts. It's a rectangle with shapes cut from the upper corners for a decorative effect and a slot that will receive a corresponding slot from the upright piece of the display I've been working on. I cut the shapes from the corners first and the slot was next. It's 3/4 wide, the width of the vertical piece. I cut down on one side to the point where the perpendicular line intersected with the horizontal line, then backed the blade out. Next, I cut the vertical line on the other side, but when I reached the end of that line, I made a 90-degree turn to the horizontal line that would complete the cuts for the slot. It made sense to cut the slot in the upright piece before I went back to cutting the rest of the details. The procedure is the same for the slot I cut previously. I make a vertical cut, move the blade back to the edge, and then another vertical cut. But I need to make a 90-degree turn at the bottom from that cut. I cut to the intersection, slightly back off pressure on the blade, and then rotate the workpiece 90 degrees. The blade can make this turn in the curve it just created, plus a tiny bit of the waste area. I tried a test fit and the width of the slot was good, but the depth was not quite enough. I want the upright piece to sit flat on whatever surface it is placed. I drew another horizontal line parallel to the first one on the stand, then cut it on the scroll saw. This gave me the depth I wanted. I completed all the detail cuts on the last two butterflies. I didn't time it, but I believe it took me the better part of 2 hours. Now I'm ready to make the last 3 large cuts, and one small one, that will remove the waste material from the center of the piece. I started at the topmost of the large sections and cut from the pilot hole to one of the top corners. I backed to the pilot hole, then cut to the other top corner and across the top. This was easier than cutting to one corner and making the cross cut and then the other turn from there. That brought me to a large curved cut down the right side of that section. The next turn was easy, and then I cut along the wing until I reached the butterfly's head. I made those tricky turns in the same way as I did the first, smaller butterfly. It took me about 15 minutes to complete the rest of the cuts. There was nothing new to describe there, so I won't show myself doing such repetitive work. I've said it before, but it bears repeating. Scroll sawing requires patience. Here's the completed project, finished with a warm satin spray polyurethane. I think it looks great and would look stunning in an area with sunlight streaming in behind it. I would not recommend this project to a beginner as there are so many small and tricky cuts. Above all, this project requires patience. I'd love to read your comments and I reply to every one of them. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to avoid missing any future projects. But until then, 2 suggestions for what to watch next are on the screen.